Welcome back, Tribe. So we got one here from CNBC that's titled, What's Keeping Middle Class Salaries Low? So let's hear mainstream's reasons for why wages are stagnant and whose fault is it?
1979 to 2024, productivity in the U.S. soared by 80.9%, while hourly pay grew by just 29.4% during the same period.
The paychecks of typical workers have not grown nearly as fast as overall economic growth over the past 40 years.
In June 2024, two-thirds of middle-income households believed that their income was falling behind the cost of living.
I think that many Americans feel the financial struggle because their household budget and their household balance sheets are facing so much pressure.
Every time I check my local mom group on Facebook, I see requests or people asking where they can get some financial assistance to pay utilities or assistance with rent. And it's concerning because these people are working full-time jobs and they just can't make things work right now.
The issue of wage trends, wage suppression, it just could not be more central to what has happened to the middle class over the past couple of decades.
So what exactly is keeping the middle class from earning a higher paycheck?
I think people think inflation is a policy problem, but wages are my problem. And it turns out wages are not just your problem. Wages are entirely a policy and political variable.
The main goal of policymakers at the Federal Reserve is to ensure maximum employment while keeping prices stable. They rely on various economic data to guide their decisions, including the natural rate of unemployment.
Economists produce this.
And Fed is shitting the bed, by the way. They just did the 50-point basis cut, and bonds have gone up above 4%. That's a cool story. So we're up for another 25 to potentially 50-point basis cut just to shake the bond market a little bit. And people aren't budging. Investors are basically saying, I don't trust what you're doing. The Federal Reserve does not have this under control. Inflation is running away rampant. It has never calmed down. Unemployment is brutally high, stingingly so. It is being handled in the worst way possible because they're downward revisions of jobs and cooking the book. So now nobody even understands the latest economic reports that are coming out, if they're true or not. Most people are looking at it like with a side eye. Are you telling the truth, or are you going to revise these again after the election? We have stubbornly high unemployment, but we just had record jobs data come out for this last month. For what? Are they going to get revised again? I mean, it's crazy, dude. You can't trust the numbers anymore. The Federal Reserve, everything, all the three-letter agencies, they've all been corrupted. They've all picked a side politically. They're doing things that should amount to treason these days, honestly. These are supposed to be apolitical institutions that only deal in a very narrow scope, the band for which they were provided legal authority to deal in. It's all gotten political, every institution. It's crazy how this is being eaten alive from the inside out. America's being destroyed.
Thing they call the natural rate of unemployment. It's like the lowest unemployment can go without generating inflation.
Throughout history, the natural rate of unemployment has hovered between 4.5% and 5.5%.
And then we look at actual unemployment and how often it is above that estimate of the natural rate versus below. And if you look at the years since 1979, we have spent far more time with actual unemployment well above that estimate of the natural rate.
Between 1949 and 1979, the actual unemployment rate was cumulatively 15.3% below the natural rate of unemployment. In contrast, the unemployment rate was cumulatively 35.7% above the natural rate of unemployment between 1979 and 2017. This has real-world consequences for the American middle class, because wages tend to grow faster during periods when unemployment is low. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that just a 1 percentage point drop in unemployment leads to wage growth of 0.4 to 0.9 percentage points.
So in the real world, we've had no real unemployment growth then because wages have stagnated heavily and we've automated a lot of work. All our factories shipped overseas. Now the advent of AI is changing white collar work. So technology has always been against the man, but rapidly so in the modern world that we live in. Plus, we're in a interconnected world economy now. So why have a factory in America when you can hire some cheap Chinese or Indian labor or wherever they're building shit now? All the factories in the world have already offshored from the West, and now we're waking up. Oh my God, we don't really produce anything anymore. We're a service-based economy, and that we'd starve to death. Time to retool the factories, boys, get everything up and running. But it's too expensive to pay an American worker what he should be paid. Is there any way to import these cheap people over into the United States? I know. Open up the floodgates at the borders. Okay.
For workers near the median of the wage.
And what is unemployment, by the way? Everybody knows that saying that the way they factor unemployment today is different anyways than times past. Unemployment should simply mean you have no job, period. End of story. Doesn't matter if you're looking for work, that doesn't count as unemployment, or whatever other criteria they use these days to filter out a bunch of people that otherwise would be considered unemployed. Bullshit. The numbers are cooked. It's way higher than it actually is. We are in a dying, sick economy.
Wage distribution.
Best bargaining chip any employee has to getting wage growth is going to the boss and saying, I'm going to go somewhere else unless I make more money. And that's just not a credible threat when unemployment is high. The only people whose wages are not very affected by unemployment are like the 90th and 95th percentile. Like they don't need super low unemployment to get some consistent wage growth, but the middle class absolutely does.
This means the Federal Reserve's policy decisions that result in higher than necessary unemployment might be creating conditions that actively hold back wage growth for middle-class Americans. Location could be another factor.
There are other reasons for why we've seen less growth in the middle than, say, at the other parts of the distribution. Another one is just that people don't move as much as they used to.
The share of Americans on the move has declined over the years, from more than 20% in 1948 to just 8.7% in 2020.
Really, share of mover, like moving around is why you make less money? Or how about starting from the 50s, tracking this down, that real wages versus cost of living, this is pretty much tracking on what we're seeing here. Like, look, these spikes here, this decrease can coincide with cost of living increases, college tuitions out of control, housing prices out of control, cost of gas, groceries out of control compared to real world gains in wages. Of course, people are moving less by 2020 because they have less in their bank account.
Between 1986 and 1997, almost 29% of job seekers relocated for new jobs. That number has fallen to just 1.6% in 2023. Location plays a crucial role in wages. Despite the surge in remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic, wages for remote and hybrid jobs haven't grown nearly as much as salaries for full-time in-office roles, with some research estimating that remote workers could earn up to 30% more if they came into the office 5 days a week.
Decades ago, when I was a worker living in sort of a lower opportunity area, I would move to a higher productivity city, like maybe San Francisco or New York City or Los Angeles. And as a result, I'd be able to capture higher wages, gain more skills, and then move up the income distribution. Now there's a lot less people moving across areas to capture those opportunities. Real reason behind that is astronomical housing costs that are due to excessive regulations at local levels.
Home prices hit a record high in June 2024, with existing homes selling at a median price of $426,900. In line with typical seasonal trends, home prices declined in July and August, but still set new records for those months.
The overwhelming number of jobs in the U.S. are in places that have really not seen much construction of housing.
Some economists also argue that globalization has played a pivotal role in stalling wage growth for middle-income Americans.
The expansion of trade with countries that have much lower wages, I think that was always going to provide quite a bit of pressure on the U.S. middle class because so much of that trade runs through like the manufacturing sector, which is where a lot of middle-class jobs have been.
Between 1995 and 2013, trade with lower-wage nations like Mexico and China reduced wages for workers without a 4-year degree by roughly 5.6%, or about $2,000 per year for workers at the median wage.
Also, NAFTA. Thank Bill Clinton for that one. Completely destroyed what was left of America's manufacturing.
However, whether globalization is actually to blame has long been debated, with some research suggesting it has had a minimal impact on wage and income inequality.
It's not just that we did it, we also did it on terms set by trade agreements that really, people call them free trade agreements. They weren't. They were basically exercises in selective protectionism. Who gets protected, who doesn't? Middle-class workers were not protected. Corporations, especially corporations like software companies, drug makers, Hollywood, were all protected.
Car producers, a million other things that required factories. They all got shipped either upstate Canada or downstate to Mexico, where they're producing a lot of our cars now and a bunch of other shit. It just makes sense. Think about it. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, if you're a company and now you could freely trade and move and hire people from Mexico for cheap, why don't you? And then you could re-enter with your products into the U.S. market at margins that are unheard of had you produced domestically. Who does that hurt, by the way? Oh yeah, the average guy. So people were all clapping at shit when we were signing NAFTA. Congratulations. Yet another nail in the coffin for the average American worker.
In these trade agreements, so it's not just the natural flow of globalization, it's how policy shaped how it happened and who got protected and who didn't.
Yep. Remember, I told you guys it doesn't matter who you vote for because no matter what, the corporations are going to have their winner picked. This is what I'm talking about. Whether Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter who you pick, guys. These people, the corporations and the elite, it's the have versus have nots problem. It's not the color of your skin. It's not your religion. It's not anything else. What's in between your legs. It's who has shit and who doesn't. The people who have shit always got the horse picked as their winner because they pick both horses to run the race. They finance all the campaign. The rest of this shit is just a charade on TV to make you or get you galvanized to pick a side by low-hanging fruit of culture wars and whatever other bullshit they're pushing, while your quality of life, your wages, the quality of life of your children, housing, inflation, all that shit is being destroyed and destroying you in your current life. You're just noticing now because the uptick has been so insane post-COVID. But we've been on a gradual decline since the 50s. People have been voting blindly against their own interest. This is what happened. People don't want to learn, though. Until we get a third party where average, hardworking Americans get to place themselves in positions of power, don't expect billionaires, don't expect cackling fools, don't expect senile, mumbling idiots, don't expect anybody that takes money from any corporation to ever be on your side. It is what it is.
Regulatory policies can limit the power workers have within the labor market.
We've seen this huge decline in the share of workers who are represented by a union in the U.S. economy.
In 1983, roughly 1 in 5 Americans were in a union.
And this is what I'm talking about, man. I had a post that was talking about the union boss, the longshore workers, where they shut down all the ports. And I wrote, I don't care what an asshole he sounds like on the community post. And people were like, yeah, but they already make $86,000 plus the 69% increases that they want, plus the overtime making over $100,000. The average man hates the fact that these guys were fighting for wage increases just to keep up with inflation because there was a crab in a bucket mentality that we have now. It's been instilled in all Americans. Why the fuck should they complain when they're already making $80,000 a year, $100,000 plus with overtime? Instead of supporting the workers, just like we didn't support the railroad workers that Biden threw under the bus and forced back to work with no renegotiating what they wanted. Everybody now, the average worker, so brainwashed that they're fighting against average workers standing up for themselves. Why? Because they earn more than me and they should be happy. It's the victimhood mentality. I have it worse than they do. They have no right to complain. The point is none of us have it good, but at least somebody stood up to fight for something and decided to cost the Maritime Association $5 billion a day that they were shut down. Imagine that. They could stow away one day's profit out of the entire year and make sure all those workers are secured in the ports. That's how greedy these companies are. These dudes weren't even asking for much. Is barely keeping up with the inflation that we're seeing today, which your employer should be doing for you. But you don't have a union to represent you because you're going to have the same corporate shtick that has been indoctrinated into mainstream America. Unions are shit. Unions are corrupt. Unions are part of the problem. No, there are corrupt unions. No shit, of course. But they actually help the average American worker big time. People that are currently in the unions could tell you right now, whatever's left of them, they far out earn their compatriots in the similar line of work that they do with far more job security and benefit. Yes, bro. Enjoy your corporate slop ideas. Unions are evil while they make record profits on your back with your minimal wages and you have no collective bargaining power. Good job, wage cuck.
By 2023, that number had dropped to 1 in 10. Full-time salaried union workers made about 15.9% more compared to non-union workers in 2023.
Would you look at that?
Single worker going to the boss and saying, you need to give me a raise or I'll leave. There's not a lot of force behind that threat. When you've got a union doing it, there's a lot of force behind that threat. And you look at countries that look like us, so they've experienced the same globalization shocks like the UK, Canada, Germany. Their unionization rates have fallen a bit since the peaks, but nowhere like the US fall. And then if you just sort of look at the facts on the ground over the past 30 to 40 years in the US, there's just been clearly been a growing employer hostility to union organizing efforts.
Yep.
Among U.S. employers involved in unionization efforts, more than 4 out of 10 have been charged with violating federal laws during their union election campaigns. And 1 out of 5 campaigns involved the charge that a worker was illegally fired for trying to organize a union.
Just the number of registered unfair labor practices that are firing people trying to organize a union have risen a lot. And one thing that's happened to enable that is, one, there's been a change in management norms, I think, but also like all of the penalties.
Yeah, if you want to be on the side of the corporations, just think of this. While they give themselves pay raises and golden parachutes and incredible bonus packages year over year where they vote for the CEO that hasn't really done shit. The company is barely sputtering by. They put out shit products. They're charging customers more. Leadership is dead. Management is stupid. You're seeing everything that management wants you to implement and is destroying sales in the store. They vote to give themselves tremendous raises in the tune of tens of millions of dollars for horrendous jobs done, while you are supposed to get a pat on the back of 5-cent raise for your hard work, if there's a raise at all, because, hey, we're running really lean in this economy. Oh, look, we just had our quarterly report, and we're happy to report to our shareholders that we have just made record profit. Will you share in those record profits with all your workers that helped you achieve these numbers? No, we're going to give ourselves more bonuses because we need our 8th yacht and our 10th private jet. Good job, bro. Shitting on unions, hating on these longshoremen, trying to get theirs because the power of the dollar has gone down in the last 5 years dramatically, and they want to maintain the quality of life they've worked hard for. So yes, we're all getting by. We're all struggling. Pay is not kept up at all, and people should be unionizing and demanding more. Or you could just keep reading headlines of how the stock market is having record highs with companies posting record profits and you looking at your pockets, emptying them out and pennies falling out. You don't get any part of this record profit sharing. Do not feel bad for any of these companies at all. They've gaslit you hard, talking about, well, if we increase the pay of the longshoremen, well, if we unionize and ask for more money, the company's going to charge the customer just more price. No, that's not how the free market works. For example, Starbucks and another shitty coffee chain, if you unionize at Starbucks and you demand to make $10, $15 more an hour, they're not going to charge exorbitantly for their coffee. Management will eat the profits at the bottom line because the next coffee shop down the street is still cheaper and people would rather go and shop there. It's always a simple supply and demand, but they've got people gaslit into thinking they'll just pass the cost down to consumer. In business, that's bullshit. That's what you call a monopoly.
For doing that, just like they're not adjusted for inflation often. They've always been pathetically low. Like if you fire a worker for trying to organize a union, the penalty you face is you have to pay them back wages after the whole legal process grinds out and they come back to your company. But then you're allowed to deduct any wages they made in the meantime at another job they got. And so firing workers trying to form a union is just a pretty small cost of business. And it pays off great because unions really do raise wages and that's not something employers want.
The decline of union membership isn't the only roadblock for growing the middle class workers' income.
So in many cases, you'll have policies at a local level and a firm-specific level that cut off wage growth.
There's occupational licensing in different areas of the country, which can make it harder to start a new career.
While estimates vary, between a fifth and a third of all American workers are required to have a license to work. A study found that jobs in states requiring a license earn about 8% more compared to the same jobs in states that don't. However, just a 10% increase in licensed workers with similar skills is estimated to reduce all workers' wages down by 1.6 to 2.3%. Economists estimate that eliminating occupational licensing can reduce earnings inequality within occupations by 2 to 4%. While licensing might appear to be necessary for some professions with health and safety concerns, researchers found no statistical difference in health and safety quality outcomes between states that require licensing compared to states that don't.
Be a hairstylist in some places, for instance, you need a license from the state to actually do that. So there's a lot of these types of occupations that really are not dangerous and don't need state licensing to be made safe. But nonetheless, we have these licenses in place probably to protect the incumbents and make it harder for new entrants to come in, sort of do their own business or start this new career field and thereby increase their wages.
Nickel and dime in the customer.
As important as the middle class is economically, and I think it's incredibly important, it is just the entire game for, I think, politics.
Both political parties in the United States recognize the economic pressures facing U.S. families. There's different visions on how to intervene effectively.
I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person
sucked her way to the top. Let's be real.
On this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
For Kamala Harris, strengthening wages is about two things. It's about boosting.
Okay, here. We're going to end it here because this is where they simp to Democrats and we don't care what they have to say, red or blue. It's the same bird. Same bullshit they're spewing. Same reason why none of the shit they're promising on the campaign trail will come true, because this is how they've always operated. Team Red and Team Blue do the same shit. They make a lot of empty promises. They get the job and then no job is done. Cool story. We've all seen that one play out before. Two things politicians say they care, but don't. Middle class workers, small business. Things are getting worse. Low paying jobs, inflation, and insane rental rates prevent many from saving. Home ownership, a traditional retirement asset, is now out of reach for middle class Americans. The term middle class makes me chuckle. It's just them versus us, no in between. Feeling part of the middle class and putting yourself above people who make less money is creating the false sense that we are being adequately compensated. Exactly, man. It's always been about the haves versus have-not. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Appreciate everybody tuning in. If you haven't already, sign up to the private community. Join us on some calls. Appreciate everybody that's been buying shirts, doing the private consults. Helps tremendously keep the channel going. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there.